Good evening, everyone. Bienvenidos, bienvenidos, bienvenue. Welcome. On behalf of the Latin American and Hemispheric Studies program, which is celebrating its 50th anniversary of being part of the Elliott School of International Affairs, I want to thank President Chinchilla. I want to thank Dean Ayers and our colleagues here, our friends and the students for being here, joining with us in this very important event, as well as those who are following the event online. I will start by inviting Dr. Alicia Ayers, the Dean of the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, to make the opening remarks. But before I do that, allow me, Dean Ayers, to say a few words. Dr. Ayers holds an AB from Harvard University and an MA and PhD from the University of Chicago. She specializes in the role of India, on the role of India in the world, and is an accomplished scholar and practitioner. Her latest book about India's rise on the world stage, or Our Time Has Come, How India is Making Its Place in the World, was recently published by Oxford University Press in January 28, and was selected by the Financial Times for its summer 2018 politics list. Prior to that, she published an also award-winning book, Speaking Like a State, and is now working on another book, I understand, Bright Lights, Biggest Cities, the Urban Challenges to India's Future, under contract with Oxford University Press. Before joining our school as a dean in February, she was a senior fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations and a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia during the Obama administration, 2010-2013. So I thank you very much, Dean Ayers, for being with us and giving our welcoming remarks for this event. And without further ado, I'll invite you to take the podium.
Professor Abente-Brun, and what a great event. It's so nice to see so many people here in person and of course online. We're going to be doing hybrid events for quite a while, so I love to see it when it actually works, and I think it's all going to work tonight. We've been working on our tech and I think we're in good shape. So good evening, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to those here in person and to all of our attendees joining virtually. Thank you all for being here to help us celebrate the 50th anniversary of our Latin American and Hemispheric Studies program at the Elliott School of International Affairs. Now, tonight's event will highlight the ever-changing state of the region during the past 50 years, including the growing role of Latin American citizens, particularly women. We have a very special guest speaker, former President of Costa Rica, Laura Chinchilla, who will provide her historical perspective on events in Latin America over the past 50 years. Professor Diego Abente-Brun has asked me to provide a brief history of the origins of the Latin American and Hemispheric Studies program at GW, which can be traced back as far as 1954. I know he was doing a lot of internal research on this. It can be traced back as far as 1954, beginning with the creation of the Latin American Civilization Program, and along with it, the Studies in Latin American Affairs program. The first promotional flyer for the new program cited, quote, the demand for a coordinated instruction in the political, economic, and cultural affairs of the Latin American countries and recognition of their growing importance among nations in the world. It continued, the population of Latin America is growing faster than that of any other major region of the globe. The 20 southern republics, the sole or principal source of many essential raw materials, have also entered a period of exceedingly rapid economic development, one of the most promising fields of industrial expansion, quote. It is worth noting that Latin American republics were also depicted as joining with the United States and Canada to form the world's largest bloc of countries committed to the principle of a democratic way of life. Many vicissitudes tampered with that principle, and we are even now struggling to preserve it and rebuild it amid a severe democratic backsliding. But it's important that the commitment to support democracy has been part of our program since its inception. The program experienced reform in 1967 when a committee to reorganize the Latin American Civilization Program was set up. As a result, in 1968, the program became the Latin American Studies program housed at the Columbian College of Arts and Sciences. In 1971, I hope you're all still with us here. In 1971, the master's and bachelor's programs were incorporated into the School of Public and International Affairs, then under the leadership of Dean Bert Sapin, a political scientist who arrived at GW in 1969. And under his leadership, the program became increasingly important and influential. In 1988, in honor of GW President Elliott and his wife Evelyn, the school acquired its present name and became the Elliott School of International Affairs. Since then, the program has led students into careers in inter-American diplomacy, inter-American cultural relations, inter-American trade relations, and most importantly, to an appreciation of Latin American republics and the appreciation of what Latin American nations are. So the program was originally built on the noticeable need for Latin American leaders as the region began rapidly expanding. Today, as we celebrate this 50th anniversary, we rededicate ourselves to the mission of the program, to educate the next generation of international leaders by equipping students with the intellectual skills and the innovative approaches needed to address the problems and challenges of the 21st century, and to engage the public and the policy community to foster international dialogue and mutual understanding in order to help shape policy solutions in the region. I would like to thank Professor Abente Brun for his stewardship of the program. It's a vital part of the international affairs offerings here at the Elliott School. And under his leadership, he has created a robust calendar of events and classes that continue to draw students to study and do research in the field of Latin American studies at GW. Thank you. And with that, I will turn the floor back to Professor Abente Brun to introduce our distinguished guest speaker this evening, the former president of Costa Rica, Chinchilla, one of the most admired and respected Latin American leaders, who honors us tonight with her presence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Inez, one of the most distinguished and admired Latin American leaders, you said when you finished your presentation. Indeed, it is a great privilege, my great privilege and honor, President Chinchilla, to welcome you today to the Elliott School of International Affairs, to this celebration of our 50th anniversary. Madam Chinchilla, Mrs. Chinchilla, was the first woman elected president, to be elected president, I should say, of Costa Rica in 2014. Previously, she served as Minister of Public Security, Congresswoman, Minister of Justice, and Vice President. During her political career, Mrs. Chinchilla prompted digital and open government, the promotion of women's rights and early childhood protection, and she also promoted environmental sustainability, policies of environmental sustainability, especially preserving marine biodiversity, for which she was distinguished with international awards. She was also an advocate of police and justice reform, measures needed to deal with and tackle with the problems of crime and violence in the region. Mrs. Chinchilla, Madam Chinchilla, is now the co-chair of the Inter-American Dialogue and headed many electoral observation missions in the Americas. She chaired the Kofi Annan Commission on Elections and Democracy in the Digital Age, and is a board member of many important organizations, among others, the International Olympic Committee, the World Leadership Alliance, the Club de Madrid, the Concordia Summit, and the Euro-American Foundation. She has worked as a consultant with various international organizations, such as the Inter-American Development Bank, the United Nations Development Program, and the United States Agency for International Development. She has been part of other advisory boards, such as the UNDP Human Development Report and the Global Happiness Report. Mrs. Chinchilla holds a Master of Art in Public Policy from Georgetown University and has taught at the Institute of Politics and Public Policy at Georgetown, at the Instituto Tecnológico de Monterrey, Mexico, and the Universidad de São Paulo in Brazil. The distinguished career of Mrs. Chinchilla speaks not only about her many accomplishments, but also about the leading role that she is playing, and she is surely continuing to play in the inter-American arena in the years to come. Thank you very much, Mrs. Chinchilla, for joining us in this event. We are honored to have you here. The mic is yours, the floor is yours, and the audience is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Diego, for those generous words. And if you allow me, I will say some words in Spanish. Solamente para agradecer el que me hayan invitado en un momento tan importante y particularmente tratándose de una joya. Entonces vengo como del otro campo de batalla, académico de Washington. Sin duda alguna, una de las grandes fortalezas de esta ciudad es tener magníficas universidades. Lo que siempre recordé, porque tratábamos a veces de los estudiantes de pasarnos de una universidad a otra para ir a escuchar a unos profesores a dar algunas clases, y lo que sí siempre nos ganaron aquí en George Washington University eran las fiestas de los fines de semana. Así de Georgetown siempre nos veníamos para acá los fines de semana. But well, thank you very much for this invitation. It is an honor and a pleasure for me to join you during this very special celebration of the 50th anniversary of the Latin American and Hemispheric Studies program. Let me just practice before, because I have to follow my notes, and also at the same time I need to work on the presentation after being in my little room, just dealing with a computer. You know, the 18 months before, you need to train again in order to work in the physical world. So let me just see. Okay, yes, this is the way, and this is going back. Going back is, well, okay, I'm gonna leave it there. Okay, well, dear members of faculty, students, dear friends, Diego, muchas gracias. Ari, muchas gracias. And Dr. Ayers, thank you so much for being with us. As I told you, it is a great honor to be here. I want to congratulate you for this milestone and to thank you for your enduring interest on my region's affairs. Despite its weight in the global economy and in geopolitical dynamics, Latin America continues to be a topic of mystery in many universities. I must admit that this is partially our fault in Latin America, because the Latin American countries invest very little compared to other regions in universities and academic institutions to produce research and knowledge about them. So thank you and congratulations for 5 decades to the study, to being study our region that today more than ever needs to understand where it came from, why it performs as it currently does, and where it is heading. And nothing proves these points better than the high toll that Latin America and the Caribbean has paid under the current pandemic. For example, with less than 9% of the world's population, the region accounts for 18% of global cases and more than a quarter of deaths, as you can see in this graph. If we move to the economic side, we will also see that the region is the most affected globally, with 34 million jobs lost and with more than 44 million people likely to end up unemployed. And here you have the latest figures by the International Monetary Fund, which confirms the big shock that, in economic terms, the pandemic meant to Latin America. But also with regards to social indicators, while poverty rise to levels unprecedented in recent decades, the income of the richest grew by more than 40% during the pandemic, aggravating one of our most concerning and endemic problems, which is the income inequality in Latin America. And here you have another figures that confirm the amazing social impact. One of them has to do with also the digital gaps that we are now having, since almost 50% of our children remain disconnected during these months. The effect on women have also been very unequal due to the previous vulnerabilities affecting them, and you can see many of the vulnerabilities. And also there was an increase not only in economic and social problems concerning the women in the region, but also an increase in domestic violence during the lockdowns and a regression of more than a decade in levels of women's participation. And finally, it is also important to mention that a very recent analysis in which I participated by International IDEA, which is an organization that works on democracy and institutional issues, but we decided to monitor the impact of the pandemic on democracy, especially on some variables in human rights. According to this monitoring, Latin America and the Caribbean has the highest share of countries with alleged or confirmed corruption cases linked to COVID-19 pandemic. So the problem was not only the impact in people's lives, but also the bad management of the pandemic in many senses. So there are clearly consequences of a region that had a long list of pending assignments, as you can see, before the pandemic hit us. From the perpetual postponement of long overdue tax reforms and the transformation of productive structures that reproduce income and gender inequalities, to the insufficient efforts in reverting high rates of violence, corruption, and impunity. They are also the consequences of poor democratic governance and an increasing capacity of societies and political elites to reach broad collective agreements. When this program started in 1971, as Dr. Ayers reminded us, I was a schoolgirl in my home country. Please don't do the maths. At that time, Costa Rica, as well as the rest of Latin America, was a very different place compared to today. While I had the opportunity to be born and raised in a democracy, that was not the case for millions of Latin Americans. By the late 1920s, only 3 countries in our region, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Venezuela, celebrated regular, free, and competitive elections to choose their governments. The rest of the countries languished under dictatorial or hegemonic party regimes. By contrast, during the mid-2000s, 20 out of 23 Latin American and Caribbean countries, with the exception of Cuba, were already democracies. That was the pinnacle of democratic progress in our hemisphere. Few regions in the world embrace the democratic creed as enthusiastically as Latin America and the Caribbean did during the third wave of democratization, as we also call it, the Latin America democratic spring. For a region that suffered from long and cruel dictatorships, this was an extraordinary achievement. During those 2 decades, the countries of the region created institutions of control, strengthened their judiciaries, enacted legislation to protect human rights, invested in their electoral systems, and amended or enacted constitutions to recognize democracy as their only form of government. At the regional level, there were also impressive progresses. For example, the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which this year celebrated its 20th anniversary, was approved. We call it our hemispheric kind of constitution. And this, the Democratic Charter was approved as a primary instrument for promotion and defense of democracy in the hemisphere, and has been applied in many different occasions where there was a very concerning democratic backsliding in some of our nations. Yet, despite this exceptional progress, in just the past decade, the region lost 4 democracies, Haiti and Honduras, considered hybrid regimes, and Nicaragua and Venezuela, considered 2 autocracies or dictatorships. During the same period, support for democracy has progressively declined across Latin America and the Caribbean, as you can see in this, in this slide. Before the pandemic, support for democracy was at a historical low. Only 48% of the population preferred democracy to any other form of government. However, regardless the pandemic's highly disruptive effects and damaging consequences, and in part due to the cyclical measures implemented by many governments of the region, support for democracy didn't plunge as feared when the pandemic started. And that is something interesting. That is probably one of the few piece of information that is giving us a little hope about our region. At this fall, in the perception about democracy in the region, at least, it stopped last year, and the most probably reason why it happens is the measures that were implemented in some countries, not in all of them, in order to respond to the very complex economic and social problems that the people were going through. So in fact, according to the most recent data, support to democracy increased marginally to 49% in 2020. There are, however, as you also can see in the other graph, great disparities in the region in this sentiment, with support to democracy as high as 40% in Uruguay and as low as 30% in Honduras. Yet the overall picture is grim. Only in Uruguay, Costa Rica, Chile, Argentina, Bolivia, and Dominican Republic, more than half of the population considered themselves Democrats. Dissecting the state of democracy in our region is a very complex task, because we have to recognize that we have important differences from one country to another. However, almost 2 years into the pandemic, and with new data available, very recently it was published, the Latino Barometro, and there are other analyses coming, it is possible to identify 3 big trends, and I want to mention them. The first is that the region has shown important levels of democratic resilience, and that is something important. This is not the only crisis that we are facing. We had already faced many different crises, economic, social, and political during the last 4 decades. And we can say that, democracy is still there. So the resilience of our democracies is something important. But also, the fact that democracy kept working during the pandemic, and we are already organizing a new cycle of elections. And something also interesting is that people are, they are voting, and they are assuming, with interesting levels of participation in some countries, this important civic duty. So thanks to the professional work of electoral authorities, elections continue to take place despite some postponements, preventing greater social and political instability and revitalizing the enthusiasm for democracy. Investing in electoral systems and celebrating free and periodic elections is something that the region has done well since the transition to democracy. The second visible trend is that the avenues to democratic backsliding are less visible than before. And that is not only for Latin America, but it applies for the rest of the world. Support for democracy doesn't translate automatically into support for a military dictatorship. Despite the low levels of support for democracy, 62% of the region's citizens will not approve, under any circumstance, a military government. Yet, 55% of respondents wouldn't mind if an undemocratic government came to power if it helped to resolve some of the problems. With Dominican Republic leading this kind of indicators, El Salvador and Honduras too. This support for potential undemocratic regimes is compounded by an increasing discontent with political elites. 73% of citizens consider that their governments only benefit a few powerful groups. That percentage is over 75% in 10 countries and of 80% or more in 6. This certainly is a perfect storm for the invigoration of populist leaders with little regard for the rule of law. The deterioration of the socioeconomic conditions of millions of citizens due to the pandemic and the disaffection of voters with political parties are also fertile ground for populism. Today, more than coups or electoral frauds, the most serious threat to democracy comes from the weakening of the rule of law, either intentionally by the so-called strong leaders or caudillos, or neglectfully by democratic leaders that overlook strengthening democratic institutions. While the region doesn't wake up every day with more autocracies within its borders, it certainly wakes up every day with democracies of low quality, characterized by poor governance, weak judiciaries, arbitrary restrictions on freedom of expression, and attacks on electoral authorities and the media. Without disregarding the regional mechanisms established to respond to sudden cases of democratic collapse, Latin America and the Caribbean must place greater emphasis on the process of gradual and progressive democratic deterioration that has run through the region since the first decade of this millennium. Operating under the logic that everything is fine until everything is wrong carries the risk that instruments such as the Inter-American Democratic Charter, among others, will be activated when it is too late. And that is exactly what is happening today with Nicaragua. Today, we got a very positive vote at the OAS. I was, working around the building. I was lobbying in favor of the votes that we were needing. And that was a very good, a very positive voting, because only 7 countries decided just to abstain. But it is too late. It is too late. Nicaragua is about to have this massive fraud in just 2 weeks. And nothing can be done at this point, but just, to approve this kind of international declaration denouncing what is happening there. So we must act under the premise that democracy in the region is imperfect, and that its defense is an everyday task and not only of acute crisis of democratic breakdowns. As much as it bothers us, we must remind ourselves that the Democratic Charter doesn't reflect our reality, but our aspirations. Therefore, all democracies in the region require constant vigilance and support, as well as unified, decisive, and timely political action to protect them. The third visible trend in the region that I want to mention is that traditional and fresh approaches to democracy are both clashing and coexisting at the same time in our political systems. On one hand, citizens of the region highly value voting despite their disenchantment with political parties and democracy. Overall, 77% consider voting a good thing. Yet, when that percentage is disaggregated, as you can see there, 46% consider that one should always vote, and 31% consider that one should always vote, but at the same time protest. These numbers are not surprising at all. While electoral participation is one of the region's most valuable features, as I have mentioned, mass mobilizations and protests have also been a constant before and even during the pandemic. According to this organization I already mentioned, I belong to IDEA International's monitor. During the pandemic, protests took place in 23 countries of the region. The motives behind these protests and mobilizations are multiple, from frustration with their governments, poor response to the pandemic, to their anger with the high levels of inequality, unemployment, and corruption. Yet it is also visible within these mobilizations the presence of new actors with new agendas, especially women, youth, and groups traditionally excluded from the political arena. These are actors who want to be heard, but also to participate. More crucially, these are actors who want democracies to be more inclusive and participatory. In a certain way, the Latin Americans have voted many times, but have discovered that there is a political life between one election and the other. And they want to say something about what happens between one election and the other. So here is where the challenge lies: how to renew and rewire the traditional channels of democratic participation, mainly parliaments and political parties, while designing and putting forward new mechanisms for citizen participation that could have a real impact in decision and policymaking process. This is not an either-or challenge. We must work on both components at the same time, and we must do it urgently. With regards to the traditional institutions of democracy, both political parties and parliaments are the least trusted institutions in the region, gathering the confidence of only 13% and 20% of citizens, respectively, as you can see. The risk of these extremely low levels of trust in collective organizations of political representation are twofold. On one hand, they directly open a window of opportunity, again, for populist and authoritarian actors to emerge. On the other, they show the lack of trust collective vehicles to aggregate interest and reach broad agreements. And right now, because of the complex decisions that we need to take to tackle the economic problems, these kind of agreements are going to be very critical. On the other hand, they show the lack of trusted collective vehicles. Okay, I already mentioned these, excuse me. In other words, the region has a serious challenge of democratic governance within its hands, which so far has not handled well. Some simplistic solutions like hyper-presidentialism, very common in our countries, and the weakening of controls of executive power end up harming democracy and the rule of law. Additionally, they neglect addressing the biggest need in the region, which is to build consensus and agreements amongst different political views and not to impose the uncontested will of just one leader. On the other side of the challenge, some electoral reforms with the aim to opening politics to more participation have resulted in fragmentation and atomization of political parties, also hindering society's capacity for collective action, very close to what is happening in my country right now. While some specific mechanisms like gender quotas and other reforms to enhance equality in parties' internal elections have benefited traditionally excluded groups, the increase in the number of political parties has not fixed Latin America's crisis of representation. This is not, and I want to be very clear in this point, this is not a defense of traditional political parties, although I belong to one of them. But what I want to mean is that that any kind of institutional reform has to be managed in a very, very careful way. So my point also here is that while the political system continues to feed incentives for political polarization and vetoing, and corruption continues creeping in parties and parliaments, increasing the political offer to citizens will not fix the problem. On the contrary, citizen frustration and disenchantment will continue to grow as expectations for change continue to be unfulfilled. Trying to fix political parties without fixing decision-making processes and vice versa is an endless waste of time and resources. So dear students, dear faculty members, I am aware of the bleakness of my analysis about the state of democracy in the region, but it wouldn't do any good to democracy to overlook its faults. Yet I also believe that there is hope and that there are opportunities to strengthen democratic governance in our countries. In doing this, we must engage in efforts to impact the quality of our institutions and of our leadership, while at the same time strengthening our civic values and empowering our citizens. Let me develop more about this last point of citizenship. I think that we must strengthen and protect civic society organizations. Organized civil societies continue to be the last barrier against autocratic drift. We must also find ways in which these organizations can better impact policymaking. There is also a tremendous opportunity in harnessing digital technologies to make decision-making processes more participatory and inclusive. The pandemic made possible ways of engagement with elected officials that just a couple of years ago were considered almost impossible or too costly. The present impulse of digitize, the present impulse to digitize the relationship between citizens and the state must be sized wisely, of course, because there are warnings. Digital technology, especially social media, can entail harmful effects for democracy if unregulated. From my experience, drawn from leading electoral observation missions in countries like Mexico in 2015, the United States in 2016, and Brazil in 2018, I can assure you that attacks on electoral authorities and their members are amplified via these platforms, hurting the integrity of elections and the legitimacy of the authorities. So unregulated use of social media for electoral campaigns also fuel political polarization and violence. Finally, Latin America and the Caribbean countries must invest in more and better education, a sector badly affected by the pandemic. Investing in education not only makes societies more productive and prosperous, but also more democratic. According to the most recent data by the Latinobarometer, education is the main factor shaping generations of Democrats in our region. That's a very powerful piece of information. Living in a democracy, thus, is not sufficient to turn citizens into Democrats. The same report also warns that young people show more indifference towards democracy compared to their elders, which is extremely worrying. Promoting political participation of young people, especially women, is therefore a direct avenue to improve the support to democracy in the region. We have in front of us the historic opportunity to fundamentally reshape democracy for the decades to come. However, as socioeconomic conditions will continue to harden for millions of citizens in Latin America and the Caribbean, that opportunity is turning quickly into an urgent task. Academia, civil society, governments, and regional and international organizations must act urgently and decisively to protect and improve democracy. We cannot be satisfied with the fact that democracy is resilient in our region. We must also aspire for democracy to transcend. We must plan disease for a renewed and more robust democracy. In pursuing this important task, I am confident that the region can count with all of you. Thank you so much. Want to go back, yes? We didn't practice this protocol, so sorry. Okay, let me just take all my stuff.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, President Chinchilla, for this brilliant analysis of the certainties, uncertainties, and challenges of democracy in Latin America. A very enlightening analysis. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a very interesting discussion that will not end today. Many students are here taking classes, and we sure will continue to discuss these issues in our classes, in our dealing with not only Latin America, but democracy in general. So we're going to open a period for questions and answers. I would like to first give the floor. As you know, this event was organized by LAHSP, the Latin American Studies Program, but with the co-sponsoring of our Association of Latin American Students, LATAM. So I want to give, students are here, but I would like to thank them very much, especially the members of the board, the president, Ari Voltansky, who is here from Argentina, the co-president, Ali Dambok, unfortunately is out of town today because of a commitment, work commitment, the vice president, Alexa Ponte, from Puerto Rico, and our financial officer, Maria Jose Martinez, of Mexico. Thank you very much to you and to LATAM for the support. So I would like to invite Ari to say a few words before we move into questions and answers.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Dr. Avente already thanked a lot, but still, I want to say gracias for my President Chinchilla for your presentation and for being here with us today. I think I speak for all of us when I say it's an honor to hear in first person your experiences, your thoughts, your analysis of the situation in Latin America, which is the region that we all, or most of us, come from and we are interested on. Her perspective is valuable for us to listen as well as to learn, given the progress and stability that your country, which we didn't speak that much, but still possesses. And as you were mentioning, in our region, is not that stable. So once again, thank you. And also as the co-president of LATAM at GW, and a second-year graduate student in the Latin American and Hemispheric Studies program. I want to say also thank you to you, Dr. Avente, Diego, gracias, muchas gracias, for teaching, helping, and supporting us in the way you do. It's truly an honor and a pleasure to have you as the director of the program we chose to be part of. So thank you. And then again, as co-president of LATAM, the premier professional research and social forum concerning Latin America here at the George Washington University, which is dedicated to bringing together students who share an interest in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as to promoting awareness and knowledge of the region's trials, contributions, and diversity. I want to speak on behalf of all the members of the organization when I say that it's a pleasure to be here with all of you tonight and to be co-sponsoring this event. One of our biggest goals is to strengthen student connections to the Latin American and Hemispheric Studies academic program. So we are thrilled to be able to co-host this event, as I said, and once again, one of our goals is to provide an intellectual forum for open dialogue of Latin America for students throughout the university and the DC community outside of classes, and in partnership with the Latin American and Hemispheric Studies program, where excellent faculty and professors and insightful classmates abound. Organizations have merged to create one of the best academic environments for young, motivated leaders to become experts in the region. And concerning what here former President Chinchilla was mentioning regarding the situation in Latin America, in the last couple of years and maybe even decades, we have heard and we have seen how the world started to put more emphasis in other regions, maybe than what it was before in Latin America. And so I want to call students and the community throughout the world not to lose sight of Latin America. Don't to lose the interest, the faith, and the strength to continue learning and attempting to have the region growing and being a significant and influential area in the global stage. So with that being said, I want to once again say thank you to the former President Chinchilla for being with us today, and to Diego for inviting and offering us the possibility of co-hosting such an important event. So now I want to let Alexa Ponte Vargas and María José Martínez Lorenzo begin the Q&A.
No. Well, so the way we're going to do is you're going to be taking questions that are
Yes.
online.
And in person.
Yeah, and María José will moderate, because this is an event in which our students play a very significant role. So my role as a director has ended here.
Thank you. All right, hi everyone. My name is Alexa Ponte. Like Ari mentioned, I'm the vice president at LATAM at GW. You mentioned a lot about the organization, but definitely feel free to get involved if you aren't involved already. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we're going to start with the Q&A. María José is going to be passing the mic around, and we're also going to be dividing between hybrid and in-person questions. So I'm going to kick us off with an online question, and then we'll go right into in-person. So we'll go one and one. All right. Yes.
Excuse me, I think we should invite President Chinchilla to the podium
Right on the podium.
to answer the question as well.
I don't
So
mind,
you
I can
don't?
also-
No, you share the podium, you share the
We
podium.
have to practice next time.
Yeah.
No, you can stay there and I
Okay.
can use my phone.
We have a
and-
second mic down there.
Yeah,
We
we-
have one.
Yeah.
The second one is in there? Good answers.
Okay, we could share the podium, you could use the handheld, whatever you prefer. You can come right up.
Oh, so we can also put you here. I can help with her as
Sure.
the camera. Only because the camera only has.
You want me to be here?
Yeah.
Where are you gonna be?
Over here, apparently. Okay. All right, I'm here. Can everybody hear me? I'll just project.
That's
Whatever. We're international honor students. Projecting isn't not about. Sorry. All right. Okay. So Gabriela Angel is from Cali, Colombia. She's a third-year student at the undergraduate International Affairs program at GW, and she asked, "What do you think are important qualities that Latin America's future leaders should possess in order to protect democracy in our region?"
Gabriela is
Gabriela.
her name. Well, thank you, Gabriela. A wonderful question. I think that what is most importantly for young leaders and for leaders in general is to commit themselves with, it is no more than 2 to 3 values. That's it, 2 to 3 principles, and you have to act accordingly to those principles. Because, unless that you want to govern something different than a democracy, okay? Because if that is the case, it doesn't matter. Why principles, why values? But again, we are talking about being leaders or living in democracies, and living in democracies is very important. In living in democracy, it's very important to understand that the means are quite critical. They count as much and sometimes even more than the ends. So sometimes you want to achieve something, and probably that something is very important for your people, but you are not allowed to use whatever means in order to get that goal. So that is why it is very important. Ethics is very important when we speak about living in democracies. So those principles for me, one of them is, to act accordingly to your constitution Okay, you are never more important than the Constitution. Okay, that's what we are seeing in many those strong leaders. They believe they are over the Constitution. So, respect the laws and the Constitution. I mean, that is basically the principle of rule of law. And secondly, that is something very important is to, the resources don't belong to you. So you have to be honest in the use of resources, which also means in certain way to be efficient. But for me, those are two very important principles. Of course, we can add some additional ones because also governing in democracy is not only about doing what the majority wants you to do. Part of the problem that we are having in some of the countries right now is that we have very popular leaders with 60, 70, 80% of popularity. So they think that it means that they have to forget about the minorities. And that is another important issue. So, but it's, it should be very easy. It's just to be committed with, those basic principles and values and try to act in consequence.
All right, so we're gonna move on to in-person questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
You can project, if not, we'll take the mic.
That's fine.
All right,
um,
cool.
Yeah, so first of all, awesome talk and lovely to meet you at the start.
Yes, and thank you because he has been in Costa Rica twice.
So yeah, your country is known, quote unquote, as the democratic star of Latin America. Like it's got higher ratings of democracy than even the US and Canada, etc.
Not necessarily in all the indicators, but in some. In some, yes.
So,
Thank you.
What lessons do you think the rest of Latin America can take from, I guess, the success stories of Costa Rica, being that it is a small country,
Yeah.
but it's lived with a strong institutions since 1946. Like, what do you think it can project to the rest of the region that might not be existent right now in other places?
Well, thank you for asking about my country. As you must assume, I love to talk about my country. But when I was president, because it was very tough. Too many questions from journalists and everybody, and so it was really tough. But well, that's part of also of our role as politicians. We have to be open to respond to any questions. The Costa Rican case is a little different from the region, and why? Because our history has very interesting situations or facts along our history that in certain way explain our institutional development. For example, one of them in a very long time ago in our history, our first president was a teacher. When you compare with the rest of Latin America, most of the first head of states in Latin America were generals. Those generals who won the independence wars. So I think that in certain way that changed the whole design of our institutions and also the priorities. Because we decided to invest in education very early in our Republican life. In fact, we were the first country in the hemisphere to adopt the education as a human right and also paid by the state. So, the families wouldn't have any excuse not to send the girls and boys to school. So that is something very important because again, education, I think is, it's a very important factor when we talk about how to strengthen democracy. And the other issue, which is very different from the rest of Latin America, is that when during the 40s, 40s and 50s. That was a very sad period for Latin America, because those were the years of the coup d'etat and the military rule. We decided to abolish the army. Well, we decided to tell them, goodbye. We prefer you, being at home and not in the barracks. Sorry.
Defund the armed forces.
Yes. Right. And that means that since then, and that was in 1948, just when those military coups were starting. And so we didn't contaminate it. After that, in a certain way, we were obliged to learn how to resolve our differences, not using the military, but using the institutions. And I will say that those are very important differences. Now, it doesn't, I don't want to mean that if you have an army, you can have a democracy. Of course, you can have it. But I think that also the education, and I want to go back to this issue, the education is important because we have been able to have some common shared values. And one of those values is, the value of the democratic institution, the electoral, for example, institution in our country. You cannot criticize, as many presidents are criticizing in some other countries during the elections, because that provoked a very strong reaction on the part of the citizens. You cannot campaign in Costa Rica attacking the electoral authorities. So that kind of civic values through education is also very important. I don't want to mean that we don't have problems. Of course, we are having problems right now in terms of democratic governance, but essentially concerning the way we were able to develop our democratic system, I would say that those are the most important. Thank you.
All right, we'll do another online question and then get back to our public. And then we're going to start using the mic just to make sure everybody on our online forum can hear us. This question comes from Brian Harris. Brian is an alumni of the Elliott School of International Affairs, class in 1991, and a former resident of Costa Rica. He says, should institutions, in quotes, that have existed during the loss of popular faith in political processes be conserved? Is the reestablishment of social structures, like the Chilean Constitutional Convention, congruent with maintenance of pre-existing institutions?
I don't know if I clearly understand. I don't know if Professor Diego can help me to translate it.
Read it, you can take a look at it.
Yeah.
We can take another one and
Do you
come
have
back.
it in
Yeah.
Right there. Okay, probably it's going to be easy for me to read them, because there were many concepts. It was an interesting question. There were too many concepts. So yes, okay. Yeah. Okay, yes, well, Brian, this is part of what I wanted to explain during my intervention. We now have two kind of processes coexisting right now in Latin America. You have the traditional institutions, and then you have the people asking for something new. And Chile, which you mentioned, is a very good example. Because in Chile, after the protest they experienced more than a year ago, they were not able to control them according to the traditional means. So the first lesson that Chile learned is that they need something else. That the traditional institutions were not enough, which doesn't mean that they decided to eliminate those institutions. They learned that they have to do something concerning the traditional institutions like the political parties and the parliament in order to, to regain the confidence of the people on them. But at the same time, they decided to convene a process for a new constitution. And there they are working on it. today we have a very interesting dialogue with people from Chile in the context of a important conference that we have on Latin America here in Washington every year. And it was wonderful to listen to them because in certain way, of course, there are many concerns. There are people who are a little afraid because this is something new and you never know what is going to, what is going what are you going to get from this process? So people are wondering, is this constitution going to be better or not? What it means? But I think that you have to recognize that Chile needed an institutional change. And they tried it, they move on, and they are working very hardly and very seriously in trying to get a result. But probably the most important thing is that you don't have in this process the traditional politicians. Those are citizens from different sectors. One of the main characteristics of this constitutional assembly in Chile is the diversity. But that is, it's the people, trying to define what they want as, as their institutions to guide them in the years to come. So I prefer what is happening in Chile than, of course, what is happening, and I prefer to mention one of those countries, but what is happening in other countries in which a president thinks that he has all the responses and he's trying to manage the changes that country needs. I prefer the Chilean alternative, which is highly participatory and democratic. Okay, here you are. Do I continue using it?
Yes,
Okay,
we don't
I can
have
do it.
any more
Okay.
online questions, so
Okay.
you can pick someone, and we'll take the mic to them just before.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Marilosa, can we bring the mic over?
You okay? You are the one.
Yeah, right. Let's make sure it's on.
Hi, my name is Sam, and I'm a second year undergraduate student. I wanted to.
What's your name, excuse me?
I'm Sam.
Sam.
Yes. I wanted to ask you your opinion about mandatory voting laws, and do you think that enhances or harms democracy in Latin America?
Yes, well, yeah, we have many countries doing that. Costa Rica doesn't have the mandatory voting. I prefer not to have it because it should be just kind of inspiration for the citizens to go to vote and not oblige them. But well, I also respect that in some situations, probably you have to do it. The same, for example, is happening with the quotas for women participation. The ideal is not to have laws enforcing this. I mean, ideally, you should have leaders in the political parties, being interested in having more women because they will have more representation, et cetera, but it doesn't happen. And so you need to enact the quota laws. And that has been very successful in Latin America, for example, as compared, for example, with the United States, that doesn't have this kind of laws. But in Latin America now, probably one of the best, the most important developments that we have had in Latin American politics is the participation of women. We already have many countries with 50-50 participate, 50%, 50% women and men participating in parliaments. Costa Rica is the case. But all of those examples were possible, those cases were possible because we enacted some laws enforcing the implementation of quotas. So the same happens with mandatory voting. But again, for me, I prefer not to have it, but in some contexts, you need to do it. Okay. You are the one. Yes.
Hi, my name is Isaac. Thank you for the discussion Q&A. My question is, you brought this up a bit about the media and the role they can play in democracy in either drumming up support for a particular candidate, for just making the public aware of certain issues, or in some cases, making the public aware of only a specific issue. How do you see perhaps the media helping to regain trust in democracy and trust in the institutions?
Very interesting tool. Very interesting tool because it is a complex question, because when we talk about media, we should also include social media and the role of internet and the web. But I mean, in general terms, you can have democracy without media. Okay, that is in first place, because media is what really can balance the power of the authorities. And I know what do I tell you? Because I was trained for working with media, because in Costa Rica the media is very powerful. And I was trained because I had to. And although there were very, very complex times for me in trying to respond to the media demands and trying to give my version vis-a-vis what they were saying about something, I will never accept to govern in a country without me. So it is very important in first place. But there are some problems. For example, in Latin America, sometimes media are not independent. Okay, sometimes they receive resources from government, and so that means that they are working along government, or in other cases, very powerful corporate interests are financing those media to press the political power. So I think that what is important is to regulate, to have a minimal kind of regulations. I'm not talking about regulating the content of media, but I think that you have to demand media to be transparent about where the resources come from, who are the owners, et cetera, et cetera. But again, social media now is also very important. I think that after what happened with social media during the last campaigns here in the United States, but also Latin America, I think they are they learned a lot. The traditional media learned that if they wanted to survive social media, they should compete based on, for example, facts, creating more kind of in-depth debate on some issues. So I think in a certain way, we are right now in a very good time in terms of media, traditional media, and social media is another history. But again, let me tell you, the examples that we are having in many countries trying to regulate social media, what I tell you is that probably the responses are going to be worse than what is happening right now. Because in many governments around the world are just trying to control social media. And that is going to be something to be aware of.
We have time for about 3 more questions, maybe 2. You want to choose? So there's somebody standing up right there.
Oh no, you do it. Let's yes.
Go right over there.
We finally we have women asking questions.
There you go.
Good evening. I just want to echo the gratitude for a wonderful presentation. My name is Alejandra Guetta. I'm an alumni of this program. You cited a wonderful example when you talked about the elections in Nicaragua, the upcoming elections, of this posture of everything is fine until it's too late. So I think the question remains, what happens in the aftermath? What can a number of actors, whether that be civil society, private sector, international, regional, what is the appropriate response so that we don't continue to see this backsliding, and we can continue, I think, to preserve an open space and a potential avenue for democratic transitioning.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Interesting questions too. I mean, in a very simplistic approach, you should think about how to prevent and then how to remedy. In the case of Nicaragua, now we are trying to figure out how we are going to remedy this situation. But we're just starting to think about, because we already have the example of Venezuela, and nothing has happened after many years of a dictatorial government there. So we are trying to learn from this example of Venezuela in order to avoid the same kind of errors in the case of Nicaragua, because in Nicaragua we will have the need to open many different avenues to try to resolve this situation. But in preventive terms, I think that it is not easy. It is not easy, but I think that the international, when we think about development, we need to include the institutional component. So that means that many organizations that are working, through technical cooperation assistance with loans, etc., they have to pay attention about the quality of the institutions and try to invest in the quality of the institutions, because there is no country in the world that is, that, let me put it in other ways. A populist leader is a possibility in any country. We learned that lesson, okay? We learned the lesson that it was not a problem of third world countries, okay? In developed democracies, people are electing populist leaders. But if you analyze what has happened in those developed nations, is that the institutions were able to stop their pretensions. The institutions, the judges, the rule of law, and also the press play a very important role. When you don't have those kind of institutions, like in Venezuela, you will never be able to get rid of populist leaders. And so investing in institutions, the quality of institutions is very, very critical. And unfortunately, many organizations, international organizations, doesn't care about that unless it has to do with the security or the rule of law concerning the investments. No, we are talking about human rights, basic human rights, freedom of expression. And so we need to create more awareness of this component. President Biden convened a summit for democracy that is going to take place now in December. And I hope that we can get some positive initiatives coming out from that summit. But just the fact that President Biden is convening that summit on this issue is very important for the world. So investing in institutions and finally investing in the people. When you have, like, for example, Nicaragua, you have no middle class. You have no middle class in Nicaragua. The levels of illiteracy are very high. So it is easier for these kind of leaders to stay in power forever when you don't have different kind of citizenry in the country. So investing in citizens and also institutions.
Hello, I'm going to repeat what a lot of people have said, which is thank you so much for being here.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure hearing you talk. My name is Sophia. I'm a first year LAHSP, Latin American Hemispheric Studies master student. I kind of want to touch on like an overarching theme that we've have discussed about specifically about women and women participating in political institutions and democracy. We can see in the region in Latin America, there's still very big gaps in terms of engagement in the political participation of women and in leadership. In your experience as a female leader of a Latin American nation, what are concrete steps that institutions and also governments and political parties can take to encourage women to participate in the political sphere and become leaders themselves?
Yes. Yes. Well, fortunately, that is as I already said, that is one of the positive changes in Latin America. Women have gained important spaces in politics, and let me tell you, they are doing quite well. In some countries, since we are suffering this, the representation is the fragmentation of the political parties, and so it is resulting in very also fragmented congresses all around the region. So in many countries, that's something I usually say when I invited, because I work with female politicians in Latin America. I try to support them and to accompany them when they are training or they are participating in a conference. And my first advice is, it doesn't matter if you belong to different political parties. You have to be able to find out some common grounds. I mean, it doesn't matter if it is one or two policies, okay? And you have the possibility to become the larger fraction, or the larger, the larger group in Congress, and that is happening. And so they come together and they are trying to advance a common agenda in favor of women's rights. So I think that we are doing quite well. Of course, there is a kind of backlash now, for example, all that has to do with political harassment against women. So in some countries, they are working on passing some laws. So you can punish those using political harassment during the campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. But that is something good happening in our countries. Okay.
We are heading to the last question from the public, and then we will close.
Just to reiterate what everybody else has said, I really loved your talk. You talk with a lot of passion and persistence, and that's one thing that I admire, especially with a woman being in your position and making history for everybody else. One of the major things that I wanted to ask you about is how do you combat the engraved like racism within a lot of the institutions and ensure that marginalized groups are still gaining access to education, representation, and everything else that everybody else kind of gets? And what does that look like, and what advice would you give to other countries in Latin America as well?
Thank you. Latin America is a very diverse region. We have the coast, we have the mountains, we have different ethnic groups. And so those issues about how to bring the different groups, not only in terms of having access to different programs and policies and the benefits of those policies, of course, a day-to-day discussion in Latin America, but also how to bring them into politics. And for me, let me tell you that we should start just claiming access to some of the policies. I think that the word that really counts is empowerment. It's empowerment. Once that the groups are empowered, they are going to be able to get the benefits of some policies faster. And that is what that means. Of course, trying to encourage the leaders of the different communities represented in different groups giving them opportunities to be elected. Sometimes another laws are also necessary, working on quotas, but mostly trying also to give them the tools so they can be able to work together. One of the problems we have in Latin America is that some of those groups have many differences within them. And if they are divided, it's going to be hard for them to move on. But basically, I would say that those are.
Well, thank you very much, President Chinchilla. Thank you to our students of LATAM. We had a wonderful, brilliant presentation, great questions, many more questions that we'll be discussing in class, as I said before. So without further ado, I invite you to join us with this reception. We're going to be here. We got some drinks, some of them. Again, thank you very much, especially to all this wonderful audience of students. And we're really very, very, very happy that you were here, that you participated, and we're very happy as well to have been able to offer you the program and the students this opportunity to have President Chinchilla and have such a wonderful discussion. Give us allow me to give you.
It's very usual in Spanish speakers to put one more. I'm so sorry for that.